She had folded the letter 3 times before she boarded that stage, pressed it flat against her knee through 4 days of dust and broken springs because a folded letter was a future she could hold on to. Clerk and housekeeper wanted, honest pay, inquire at Dorn's Crossing. That was all, a roof, a wage, a small, ordinary life out where nobody knew her name or what she had run from. She thought it was just a job interview. She did not know that by the time the sun went down behind those red hills, she would be standing between 2 rifles and a frightened child, and that the answer to one quiet, terrible question would decide whether she was the kind of woman she'd always hoped she was. Some doors you walk through. Some doors close behind you the moment your boot touches the floor. Eliza Marsh walked through both that afternoon, and only one of them ever let her come back the same. This is the story of the day she stopped being a stranger to herself. I have kept a ledger for 19 years, and in 19 years I have never written a lie in it. That is not a virtue. A ledger is just a place to put the day so you can stop carrying it. 1 line every night by the lamp. Mare foaled both alive. Prout short on the oat money again. Rain coming, knees say so. Small truths, the kind that don't ask anything of you. I bring this up because the day Eliza Marsh stepped off the noon stage, I wrote 4 lines and not one of them held the shape of what actually happened. I have gone back and read them more times than I'd admit to a sober man. They say nothing. Stage came in. New woman for Halloran, trouble at the well. Long night. You could read that and think it was the day a hinge broke. It was the day a great many things broke, and most of them I'd had no idea were even load-bearing. My name is Calder. I run horses on at least 2 miles east of Dorn's Crossing, which is a way station and store and not much else, pinned to the bottom of a country that does not particularly want anything pinned to it. I am 51 and built like a fence that's been leaned on. I had a wife. I do not now. I mention her once and then I'll leave her be, the way you leave a sleeping dog. My Ada died of the fever the spring of the bad water, and I have never gotten the habit of cooking for one, so I take my noon meal at Halloran's like half the drifters in the territory. That's why I was there. That's the whole reason. A man's life turns on smaller hinges than he'd like. The stage came in loud and late, the way it always did, Driscoll cussing the team down to a walk in the wash before the store. Dusk came over the porch in a slow brown wave, and we all squinted into it, and out of it stepped a woman in a gray traveling dress that had been a good dress once, before 4 days of road. She had a carpetbag in one hand and a folded paper in the other, and she held the paper the way you hold a ticket you're afraid won't be honored. She was younger than I'd guessed Halloran would hire, middle 20s maybe, with the kind of face that's plain until it decides to do something, and then it isn't. Brown hair pinned back hard, a few strands gone loose and stuck to her temple with the sweat. She looked at the store. She looked at the 3 of us on the porch, me, Prout, and the boy who swamped out the stable, and she squared her shoulders in a way I recognized, because it's the same thing a green horse does right before it decides whether to bolt. I'm looking for Mr. Halloran, she said. I've come about the position. Inside, I said, because Prout was looking at her in a way I didn't care for, and because somebody had to say something that wasn't Prout. Now I have to tell you about the well, because that's where the day stopped being ordinary, and it had already started before she ever got down off that stage. We just didn't all know it yet. Behind the store, past the corral, there's a stone well house and a stand of cottonwoods that hold the only shade for a mile. That morning, early, before the heat, old Halloran had found 2 people in that shade, a woman and a boy, Apache. I'll tell you what I knew then and what I learned after, and I'll try to keep them separate, because the difference between those 2 things is the whole of what I'm trying to say. What I knew then was this. There was an Apache woman at the well, and she would not leave, and there was a sick child with her, and the whole crossing had spent the morning arguing about it like men argue about whether they can't change. Prout, who freighted hides and ore and had opinions in proportion to nothing, wanted them gone before the army patrol came through, which was due any day, because a patrol that found Apache at a white man's water might decide the white man was feeding the wrong mouths, and Prout had government contracts he was fond of. Halloran, who was 70 and tired and not a cruel man, just wanted the problem to be somebody else's, and the woman would not go. What I learned after was different, and I'll get to it. When Halloran came out wiping his hands and saw the new girl, his face did a thing I'd never seen on it, relief and dread at once, like a man who's found the one tool he needs in the middle of a fire. "Miss Marsh," he said, reading the name off the letter she held out. "You wrote about the clerking." "Yes, sir," she had a steady voice. I gave her that right off. 4 days of stage in a strange country, and she kept her voice level. Bookkeeping and correspondence, and you mentioned light housekeeping. I worked 3 years for a dry goods firm in Kansas City. I have references." "Course you do." Halloran wasn't listening. He kept glancing toward the back of the store, toward the well. "Course. Look, Miss Marsh, it ain't today ain't a good." And that's when the boy cried. It came thin and high from behind the store, the particular sound a child makes when it's past the point of crying for help, and is only crying because the body has to do something with the pain. Eliza Marsh went still. I watched it happen. She'd been arranging her face into the patient, eager look you wear for an employer, and that sound went through it like a nail through paper. "That's a child," she said. "That ain't your concern, miss," Prout said, coming up the porch behind her. He was a big man gone soft, with a beard that hid a weak chin and a way of standing too close. "That's a squaw at the well, got no business being there, and she'll be gone directly. I have thought a great deal about the next 10 seconds, about how a whole life can be in them." Eliza Marsh set her carpetbag down on the porch boards. She set it down deliberately, the way you put down a thing you mean to come back for. She still had the folded letter in her hand. And then, not looking at Halloran, not asking, the interview already forgotten or perhaps not yet understood to be over, she walked around the side of the store toward the sound of the crying. "Miss Marsh," Halloran started. She didn't stop. I went after her. I'll be honest about why. It wasn't kindness. It was that Prout had started after her too, and Prout with his blood up was a thing I'd rather be between than behind. The well-house shade was cool and smelled of wet stone and something underneath it, the sweet-rot smell of a wound gone bad. The woman sat against the well-house wall with the boy across her lap. She was younger than her stillness made her seem. She had a knife, an old trade knife, the blade worn thin as a willow leaf, and she had it not raised but ready flat against her thigh, and her eyes came up to us with no fear in them that I could find and no hope either. Just a calculation. How many? How fast? Which one first? The boy was maybe 6. His leg was wrapped in a strip of trade cloth gone stiff and dark, from the knee down, and the skin above the wrapping was the shine-tight red of a thing that's poisoning the blood. He was small and he was burning up, and he had stopped, now that strangers had come, even the crying. Eliza Marsh stopped about 6 feet off. She did not reach for the boy. She did not coo or cluck or do any of the foolish things people do at the sick that make it about themselves. She went down on her heels so her eyes were level with the woman's, and she put her hands open on her own knees where they could be seen, and she said, in English slowly, because what else did she have, "I won't touch him. I won't touch him unless you let me. But I think his leg is killing him, and I have done sick rooms, and I would like to help. That's all. That's all I want." The woman looked at her for a long time, long enough that Prout behind us said, "This is foolishness." And I told him to shut his mouth, and he did, which surprised us both. I don't know what the woman saw. I have wondered since whether it was the open hands or the level eyes, or whether after a night and a morning of men deciding things over her head, she simply recognized the rare event of being spoken to and not about. But she shifted the boy on her lap an inch, so his bad leg came a little toward Eliza. An offering, a permission, given an inch at a time. "Water," Eliza said to no one, to all of us. "I need clean water and a clean knife and the strongest spirits in that store and clean cloth torn in strips and a lamp lit even in daylight." She looked back over her shoulder and found me, picked me out of the two men as the one most likely to move. Please. I'll tell you, I have been given orders by trail bosses and cavalry sergeants and one judge, and I do not recall jumping the way I jumped for a dusty woman in a ruined gray dress who had been in the territory for the length of one cup of crying. We worked on that boy in the well house, shade for the better part of 2 hours. I won't pretend I understood the half of it. Eliza did. She opened the wrapping, a thorn-deep gash along the shin, days old, gone septic, and she did not flinch at it, though I saw her swallow once, hard, and her hands shook for a moment before she made them stop by some private violence I couldn't see. She cleaned it with the spirits, and the boy screamed, and the mother held him and sang something low and toneless and steady, the same 5 notes over and over, and Eliza kept saying, I know, I'm sorry, I know. Not because the boy understood the words, but because the sound of them, the up and down of them, was a kind of company. The mother's name, I learned that day, was Nolan. The boy was Tay. She told us herself when the worst of the cleaning was done and the boy had passed into the gray half-sleep of fever, and she told us in English better than Prout's slow, careful, but better. She had worked 2 seasons at a mission, she said, when she was a girl. She had left it. She did not say why, and Eliza did not ask, and that not asking was, I think, the second thing that made Nolan trust her. The story came in pieces, the way the true ones do. Nolan and the boy had been with a small band, kin, moving. She did not say toward what or away from what, and again Eliza didn't push. 3 days back the boy had torn his leg on a deadfall in the dark. The wound had soured. The band could not slow for one sick child with a patrol-thick country between them and where they were going, and Nolan would not leave him to die on a horse blanket, so she had taken him and walked. She had walked to the only water with a roof over it she knew of, the well at the white man's crossing, because a child does not care whose hands hold the dipper, and because she had decided, and you could see, looking at her, what that decision had cost and what it had hardened into, that she would rather beg at the door of men who might kill her than watch her son's fever take him in some arroyo where no one would ever know his name. That was the choice she'd already made before any of us woke up that morning. That was the load-bearing thing. And here is where I have to be honest about myself, because I said I would. When I first walked into that shade, I had a thought. I'm not proud of the thought. The thought was, this'll bring the Army's eye, and the band she came from'll be marked for it, and that's a deal of grief over one boy who's like today anyhow. It was a cold thought and a practical one, and it was exactly the kind of thought a man tells himself is just clear-eyed, when really it is only the fear of trouble wearing the coat of wisdom. I did not say it out loud, but I thought it, and Prout said it twice, 3 times, louder each time as the afternoon wore on and his impatience curdled. Patrol comes through and finds this, it's all our necks. You hear me, Halloran, your store, your well, they'll say you've been victualling hostiles. And the terrible thing, the thing that sat in my chest like a swallowed stone, was that he wasn't entirely wrong. That's what makes a man like Prout dangerous. He is right just often enough to be listened to. It was Eliza who answered him, and she did it without looking up from the boy's leg. Then I victualed them, she said. Not Mr. Halloran, not Mr. Calder, me. I'm the one with my hands on this child. You tell the patrol that. You tell them a clerk you hadn't even finished hearing did it without leave and you couldn't stop her. That's even true. She tied off a strip of cloth, neat as a parcel. I'll write it out and sign it if you like. Then it's just my neck and you can all go on being sensible. The shade went quiet. Even the boy's breathing seemed to listen. Prout didn't have anything for that. Sensible men never do. When somebody offers to carry the whole weight alone, it shames the arithmetic right out of them. He turned and stalked off toward the store, and I heard him saddling up not long after, and I knew, the way you know whether, that he was riding to meet that patrol on the road and tell them his version first, the version where he was the one good citizen in a den of fools. I knew it, and I did not stop him, because what was I going to do? Shoot a man over a thing that hadn't happened yet. I've thought about that too. Halloran stood in the well-house door a while, working his old jaw. Then he said to Eliza, not to me, The position pays $9 the month and your keep. He said it like a man laying down a card he's not sure of. If you're staying. She looked up at him then. There was blood to her wrists, and her good gray dress was past saving, and a strand of hair was stuck across her mouth, and she did not move it. "I'm staying," she said. And Halloran nodded once and went inside, and that was the whole of the job interview, a wage named over a dying child, accepted with a child's blood on her hands. I never did hear what was in her references. I don't suppose it mattered after that. A reference tells you what a person did for somebody who was watching. It can't tell you what they'll do at the back of a store where the only witnesses are an old knife, a sick boy, and a man who came around the corner for the wrong reasons. The fever broke that night, or began to. I don't say she saved him. I'm not a doctor and neither was she. And a wound like that can turn again. And we none of us knew yet what the morning would bring up the road with Prute's tongue ahead of it. But sometime after midnight the boy's skin went from the dry burn to a damp warmth, and he asked his mother for water in his own tongue, plain and querulous and alive. And Nolan made a sound I won't try to set down. And Eliza Marsh sat back against the well-house wall and put her face in her bloody hands, and her shoulders went, finally, all the way down. I lit my lamp in the store and opened my ledger and sat over it a long time. Stage came in, I wrote. New woman for Halloran, trouble at the well, long night. 4 lies that were each one of them true, and none of them the truth. What I should have written, what I know now I should have written, is that I had spent 19 years putting the day down in a book so I could stop carrying it, and that on this day, a woman I'd known for the length of one afternoon had picked the whole day up, the dangerous, unprofitable, bloody weight of it, and carried it on purpose, and that watching her do it had shown me the exact shape of the small, cold creature I'd been calling caution. I should have written that I was ashamed. I should have written that under the shame, like the warmth coming up under the boy's fever, there was something else, something I didn't have a word for yet and was half afraid to. But a man doesn't write that. A man writes long night and blows out the lamp. Out at the well house the lamp she'd asked for still burned, even though it was full dark now and made no practical sense, a light lit in daylight against a darkness that hadn't come yet. I could see it from the store window, a small steady yellow in all that black country. Prute was somewhere on the North Road, with the truth bent into his own shape. And up on the rim, when I went out at last to bank the horses, I saw fires, 3 of them far off, in a line where there'd been nothing the night before. The band had come back. I have noticed that a man can do a brave thing and a cowardly thing in the same breath, and the trick the heart plays is to let him remember only the half that flatters him. I went out to those fires. I want that on record before I tell the rest, because the rest does not show me to advantage, and I'd as soon you knew I went up the rim before you decide what I am. I saddled the roan in the dark, and I rode toward 3 fires of people my whole life had taught me to fear, and I did it because Eliza Marsh was asleep against a well house with a strange woman's child finally breathing easy in her lap. And somebody had to find out whether the morning was bringing help or bringing a war, and I could not stand to wake her and make it her wait too. She'd carried enough that day for 3 of me. That was the brave half. Here's the cowardly half in the same breath. I rode up there as much to get away from my own ledger as toward anything, from that small steady lamp in the window that I couldn't look at without seeing the shape of what I wasn't. A man will ride toward Apache fires to get away from himself. The country is full of stranger flights than that. They saw me long before I saw them. That's always how it is. You think you're sneaking up on a thing and the thing has been watching you climb for an hour, deciding. 2 men stepped out of the dark into the edge of the firelight, and I stopped the roan and put my hands up off the reins where they could be seen, the way I'd watched Eliza put her hands open on her knees, and I thought, and this is the truth, I learned that from a clerk this afternoon. 51 years old, and a woman half my age and a day in the territory, taught me how to show an empty hand. I'd brought no English they'd want and they offered me none, but one of them, older, gray coming into his hair, a face like the country itself, looked at me a long moment and then said, in the flat, careful English of a man who'd been made to learn it somewhere he hadn't enjoyed, "The boy." Not a question. He knew. Of course he knew. You don't leave your own behind without leaving part of yourself at the place you left them, looking back. "Alive," I said. "Fever broke tonight. There's a woman tending him. White woman, I didn't have the words for what she'd done, so I used the small ones. She's good with sick, he'll likely keep." Something went through the old man's face and was gone. They don't spend it where you can see, those people. I'd learned that better in the days to come. But for half a second the firelight caught it, and I saw a grandfather, or an uncle, or whatever the word was for the man who'd had to ride away from a hurt child and had spent every mile since chewing on it. "You came back," I said stupidly, because it was the only thing in my head. He looked at me like I was simple. "She did not come," he said, meaning Nolan. Meaning, she was supposed to bury the boy or save him and either way catch them up alone, the way the hard arithmetic of a hunted people demanded. And she hadn't. So they turned a whole band around in dangerous country and come back 2 nights' travel to a white man's well, against every sense they had, because a woman of theirs and a child of theirs were sitting in the open at the worst possible water and would not run. They had made the same choice she'd made. The unprofitable one. The one that gets you killed. They'd made it for her because she'd made it for the boy, and the boy couldn't make it for anyone. He could only be the small burning reason the rest of them kept choosing wrong on purpose. I have run cattle and horses my whole life among men who'd cut a lame steer loose without a second's grief, because that's the arithmetic that keeps an outfit fed. I had thought, in my cold afternoon way, that arithmetic was just the truth of the world, and that people who didn't run it were children who hadn't been hungry enough yet. Sitting my roan in that firelight, I understood I had been the child. I had never once been hungry enough to learn what they knew. That the arithmetic that keeps you alive and the arithmetic that keeps you a person are 2 different sums, and a man has to decide every single day which one he's going to be poor in. "There's trouble coming," I made myself say. "A man rode out tonight to bring the army. He'll tell it crooked. You shouldn't be near that well when they come." The old man took that without a flinch. "Then we should take her now. Tonight, the boy can ride if I carry him." And there it was, the sensible answer, the one Prout would have stood up and cheered for. Take them, vanish into the dark, leave the crossing clean. It solved everyone's problem. It was the arithmetic that keeps you alive. I opened my mouth to agree with it, because God help me it was easy to agree with. And then I thought of that septic wound, and the 2 hours it had taken to clean it, and the way the boy's skin had gone from burn to damp. And I thought about what hard riding does to a leg like that, jolt after jolt in the cold, and I heard myself say the unprofitable thing instead. "He moves tonight, that leg'll turn again," I said. "Then you've got a dead boy and a hard ride for nothing. Give it 3 days, let her keep it clean. I'll watch the road." I had just promised to watch the road. I want you to sit with that because I'm still sitting with it. A man who'd ridden up the rim to get away from his own conscience had, inside of 5 minutes, volunteered that conscience for sentry duty. That's how it gets you. Not all at once. One unprofitable sentence at a time, until you've talked yourself clear out of the life you meant to live and into a better one you never asked for. The old man studied me. "Why?" he said. Again, not a question, a test. I didn't have a noble answer. I gave him the one I had. "Because a woman down there did a thing today that showed me I'm smaller than I figured," I said. "And I'm too old to be that small in front of myself twice in one day." He looked at me for a while. Then he said something to the other man, low, in their own tongue, and the other man melted back into the dark, and the old one crouched by his fire and didn't invite me to stay and didn't tell me to go. "3 days," he said to the fire. "We will be near. If the soldiers take them," he didn't finish it. He didn't need to. The end of that sentence was the same in every language ever spoken. "Then there will be no more arithmetic at all." I rode down the rim with the cold getting into my knees and the dawn a gray rumor in the east, and I'll tell you the truth, I felt more like a man than I had since Ada died. It made no sense. I just hitched myself to about the most dangerous foolishness a person could pick in that country. But there's a kind of weight that breaks your back and a kind that straightens it, and I'd spent 19 years confusing the two. The patrol came at noon. They always come at noon. The country saves its worst for the hour when there's no shade to think in. 8 of them dust gray, a young lieutenant with a sunburn and an older sergeant whose eyes did all the lieutenant's thinking for him. And riding alongside, fat and righteous and already talking, was Prout. I was at the corral when they came in and I saw the whole shape of it at a glance. Prout had got his story in first, just as I'd known he would, and the lieutenant had the stiff, performed sternness of a young man who's been told a thing and is afraid of looking soft if he questions it. They rode straight to the store. Eliza was on the porch. She'd changed out of the ruined gray dress into the only other one she had, a brown work dress, and she'd scrubbed the blood off. But there's a thing about a person who's been up most of 2 nights with the sick. It sits in the face under the wash, and the sergeant's eyes found it and read it before the lieutenant had got his boots on the ground. "Are you the woman harboring hostiles at this well?" the lieutenant said. He'd practiced it. You could hear the practice. "I'm the woman who treated a sick child at that well, yes," Eliza said. He says, the lieutenant jerked his chin at Prout, "you've an Apache squaw in her get back of the store, and that this whole station's been feeding renegades." I watched Eliza decide something. I'd watched her decide things now twice, and I was getting to know the look, a kind of stillness that came down over her like a hand smoothing a tablecloth, everything underneath going flat and clear. "There's a woman named Nolan and her son Tay back of the store," she said. "The boy's 6 and he tore his leg open on a deadfall and it went septic and he'd have died of it inside a week. I cleaned and treated it. I'll do it again today and tomorrow. That's the harboring." She didn't raise her voice. She made it small and exact, the way you'd lay coins on a counter, daring him to call the count wrong. "If feeding a sick child is a crime in this territory, Lieutenant, I'd be obliged if you'd show me the order, because I came out here for honest work, and I'd hate to break a law I never heard of on my first week." The sergeant's mouth did something at the corner that wasn't quite a smile. Prout couldn't hold it. "She's lying or she's a fool. You let one band water here, you'll have 40, you'll have." "I've had 1 woman and 1 boy," Halloran said. He'd come out onto the porch, old Halloran, 70 and tired, who'd wanted all of this to be somebody else's problem from the first hour, and I swear to you I had not expected him to be the one to step in front of the rifle. But there are men who will watch a thing get pushed around all day and then, at the last, find out there's a thing in them that won't be pushed, and they're as surprised by it as anyone. "1 woman and 1 boy, Lieutenant," Halloran said again. "On my water with my knowledge after this morning. Mr. Prout there had business with the Army's contracts and a thin opinion of his neighbors, and you've ridden 3 hours in the heat on the strength of it. There's no band. There's a clerk doing a Christian thing and an old man too tired to stop her, and that's the whole army of it." He looked at Prout with 70 years of mild contempt. "You're welcome to water your horses and look behind the store. You'll find a child. You can decide for yourself whether he's the renegade army Mr. Prout rode so hard to warn you about." That was the moment it could have gone either way. I had my hand not far from where my hand didn't ought to be, and I could feel the old man up on the rim somewhere with his 3 days and his unfinished sentence, and I thought, if that lieutenant walks back there and his sergeant's a hard man, it doesn't matter what's true. The sergeant walked back there. Not the lieutenant, the sergeant, the one who did the thinking. Eliza went with him without being asked, which I think mattered, because she walked like a person who has nothing to hide, and that walk tells a watching man more than any speech. I drifted after at a distance Prout couldn't object to. Nolan was on her feet by the well house, the boy behind her, the worn knife gone from sight, but I knew where it was. She didn't run. She decided not to run a long time ago, and she wasn't going to start with a sergeant. She stood between the soldier and her son the same way Eliza had stood between the rifles and the child the day before. And for a moment the two women were a matched pair, one brown and one white, holding the same line for the same reason from opposite sides of everything that was supposed to keep them apart. The sergeant looked at the boy a long time. Tay looked back at him with the bright, unbothered stare of a 6-year-old whose fever has broken, and who has not yet learned fully that he is the thing the grown-ups are all so frightened about. His leg was clean wrapped and propped, and his color was good, and he was, God help us all, whittling, working a soft scrap of cottonwood with a dull spoon handle, the way a recovering child will find a thing to do with its hands. "How old?" the sergeant said. "6," Eliza said. The sergeant crouched down slow, the way you do for a horse you don't want to spook, and he looked at the boy's leg, the neat strips of it. "Who tied this off?" "I did." He grunted. He'd seen field surgery. You could tell. He'd seen the kind that's done in a hurry by frightened men and the kind that isn't, and he knew which one this was. He stood back up and his knees cracked, and he said nothing for a while, and that nothing was the longest part of the whole day. Then he turned and walked back toward the front of the store, and we followed, and he said to the lieutenant, plain, "There's a kid back there with a tied-up leg, sir. No band. No sign of one." He paused. "If we're hauling in clerks for doctoring sick children, we're going to need a bigger guardhouse, and I don't believe the captain wants the paperwork." The lieutenant, who I think was relieved down to his boots to be given a road out that didn't cost him his sternness, made it sound like a decision. He told Eliza that harboring hostiles was a serious matter, and she'd best understand the position she'd put the station in, and that he'd note it in his report. He told Halloran to keep a closer eye on his water. He told Prout, very coldly, that wasting a patrol's time on a private grievance was something he'd also be nodding, and Prout's face went the color of old liver. And then they watered their horses and they rode out north, back the way they'd come, and the dust closed over them, and it was over. Except it wasn't, of course. Nothing's ever over that clean. Prout didn't ride out with them. Prout stayed, and Prout had been shamed in front of soldiers and neighbors both, and a man like that doesn't take shame the way a bigger man would, by learning from it. He takes it the way a fire takes a closed door, by finding another way in. I watched him watch Eliza across the yard, and I did not like the patience that came into him. The loud danger had ridden off north. The quiet danger had just sat down on the porch to wait. That evening I went out to bank the horses and found Eliza at the corral fence, watching the rim go red and then purple, her arms folded on the top rail. She didn't look around. "They're up there, aren't they?" she said. "The fires last night, her people." "They came back for her," I said. "Turned the whole band around. 2 nights' ride into a country crawling with patrols for one woman who wouldn't leave one boy." I leaned on the rail beside her, not too close. "I went up last night. I told them 3 days, let the leg heal, then they take 'em. I said I'd watch the road." She turned and looked at me then, and there was something in it I hadn't earned and didn't know what to do with. "Why'd you go up there, Mr. Calder? You didn't have to. You could have let it be." I thought about lying. I had a whole ledger's worth of practice at the small true lies, but I was tired, and the rim was going dark, and a man can only carry the cold version of himself so long before the weight changes on him. "Because yesterday afternoon, a woman I'd known for an hour did a thing I've been too careful to do for 19 years, I said. "And I found out careful was just a nicer word for what I'd really been. I'm too old to learn that twice." It was near enough the same thing I'd told the old man on the rim, and I noticed that I'd told a strange Apache elder and a strange white clerk the same true thing inside a day, when I hadn't told my own ledger the truth of an evening in years. Eliza was quiet a while. Then she said low, looking back at the rim, "I almost didn't get off that stage." She laughed, but it didn't have much in it. "For days I rode out here telling myself I just wanted a small life, a wage and a roof and nobody knowing my name. I had it half talked into being a virtue." She shook her head. "First afternoon, First afternoon and I'm up to my wrists in a sick child and standing in front of soldiers. So much for the small life. You could still have it, I said. 3 more days, they're gone, it all goes quiet. $9 and your keep and nobody the wiser. She was quiet again, longer this time. The first stars were coming out hard and white the way they do in that country, and somewhere back of the store the boy laughed at something. A small, ordinary sound that 2 days ago had been a thin, high crying past hope. No, she said finally. I don't think I want it any more. The small life. She unfolded her arms off the rail and turned to go in, and at the last she stopped, and she didn't look at me when she said it, which is how I knew it was the true thing and not the easy one. I think I spent a long time running from something, Mr. Calder, and I think today I found out you can't run far enough to be a different person than you are. You can only find out, somewhere out past everything you know, what you'd actually do, and then you have to live with the answer. She went in. The lamp came up yellow in the window. I stood at the rail a while longer with the horses moving soft behind me, and the rim gone full dark, and 3 small fires winking back to life along the top of it, faithful, waiting. I thought about Prout on the porch with his patience. I thought about 3 days, and how a great deal can go wrong in 3 days, and how I'd promised to watch a road that ran in more directions than one. And I thought, though I didn't know yet how true it would turn out, that whatever she'd been running from back in Kansas City, it hadn't stayed there. A thing you run from is a thing that knows your name. And there was a man on the porch behind us, shamed and patient, who I had a cold feeling would find that out before any of us did. The thing about a man who waits is that you start to think he's forgotten. 2 days went by and Prout was almost pleasant. He fixed a wheel on his freight wagon, and he paid Halloran the oat money he'd owed since spring, and he tipped his hat to Eliza on the porch like a man who decided to be a better neighbor. I should have known. A bad temper that goes quiet hasn't cooled. It's just found something heavier than noise to do. I watched the road like I'd promised, and I watched Prout, and a man can't watch 2 directions at once. That's the oldest trick there is, and I fell for it like a green hand. The boy got stronger. That was the good of those days, and I won't let the rest of it swallow the good. Tay's leg held clean, the swelling went down, and by the second afternoon he was hobbling around the back lot on a crutch I'd cut him from a forked branch, chasing Halloran's barn cats with the grim joy of a child who's been still too long. He'd made friends with me in the wordless way children do. He'd appointed me, I think, the safe large animal in his new corral of strangers, and he followed me at the chores and handed me wrong tools with great seriousness, and I let him, because there is a particular foolishness that gets into an old man around a small boy he's helped pull back from the edge, and I had it bad. Nolin watched all this from the well-house shade with a face I was learning to read. She trusted Eliza fully now. She trusted in the careful, provisional way you trust good whether glad of it, not fooled into thinking it owes you anything. On the second evening she said to me, low in her mission English, "You watch the man, the fat one." She'd seen it before I had. Of course she had. A woman who spent her life being decided about learns to read the deciders the way I read the sky. "He's been quiet," I said. "Yes," she said, and looked at me until I understood that I just agreed with her. Here is what I pieced together after, about the thing Eliza had been running from, because she told me some of it that second night, and the country told me the rest in the way the country does, slow, sideways, in pieces you fit together long after they'd have done you any good. There'd been a man in Kansas City, her employer's son at the dry goods firm, a soft, charming, well-dressed man who was used to the world arranging itself around his wanting. He'd wanted Eliza. She hadn't wanted him, and she'd said so, plainly, the way she said everything, and a man like that does not hear no as an answer. He hears it as a thing that hasn't been correctly persuaded yet. It had gotten bad. It had gotten to where she'd had to choose between her position and her. She didn't use a large word for it. She just said, "My own say-so." And I have never heard it put better. She'd kept her say-so and lost the position, and the man had seen to it in the small, poisonous way such men can, that no other firm in the city would have her with a clean reference. He'd made her a thing whispered about. He'd taken her name and bent it into a shape that suited his pride, the same way Prout had taken the truth of the well and bent it for the patrol. That's why the small life. That's why a wage and a roof and nobody knowing her name, somewhere past the edge of everything. Not because she lacked spirit, Lord, she had spirit to spare, but because she'd learned what spirit costs a woman alone, and she'd been so tired, 4 days on a stage, of paying it. And then I got off the stage, she said, and there was a child crying, and I thought she laughed that laugh again, the one with nothing in it. I thought, Eliza, you came 2,000 miles to be small, and you can't even manage it for one afternoon. That's not a failing, I said. I know that now, she said. I didn't, on the stage. On the stage I thought my say-so was the thing that had ruined my life. Turns out it's the only thing I ever brought with me worth keeping. I have thought about that more than near anything else anyone ever said to me. The only thing I ever brought worth keeping. A man spends his whole life accumulating horses, leases, a name, a ledger full of small safe truths, and a woman with a carpetbag and a ruined dress says the only thing worth carrying is the one thing they tried hardest to take. And you understand, sitting there, that you've had the arithmetic backward your entire life. It was the third morning that Prout moved. He'd been to town, I'd thought, to deliver freight. He hadn't. He'd been to find the one kind of man who'd ride out for the right money, not soldiers, who answered to a sergeant with a conscience and a captain who didn't want paperwork but the other kind, bounty men. The territory paid in those years for Apache brought in, there were standing scripts for it, blood made into bookkeeping. And Prout, shamed before the army, had found himself 3 men who didn't care whose blood it was as long as the count was right. He couldn't get Eliza, so he'd go around her, to the thing she'd protected, and take that and call it law, and watch her learn she'd won nothing. They came at first light, the 3 of them, riding in quiet from the south while I was watching the north road like a fool. Prout wasn't with them. Prout was the kind to light a fire and stand well back of it. But it was his money and his map and his pointing finger that put them at the well house at gray dawn while the crossing slept. What saved it, what saved all of it, was the boy's crutch. Tay was up before the rest of us. Children who have been sick wake early when they start to mend, hungry for the day. He'd hobbled out to the corral to see the horses, his crutch tapping on the hard ground, and he saw the 3 riders before they saw a 6-year-old in the lee of the water trough, and he did the one thing his whole short hunted life had trained into him. He didn't cry out. He didn't run for his mother and lead them to her. He went still and small behind the trough, and then he did something I'll carry to my grave. He picked up a stone and threw it, hard, at the corral at the horses, and set the whole remuda squealing and crashing against the rails. And that noise, that sudden dawn explosion of frightened animals, brought the whole station out of sleep at once. A 6-year-old, 3 days off a deathbed. He couldn't fight and he couldn't run, so he made noise with the only thing in reach and bought the seconds that mattered. The endurance of that child, the sheer trained refusal to be the reason his people got taken. I have known grown men with medals who had less in them. It came apart fast after that, the way these things do. I was out the bunkhouse door with my rifle before I was rightly awake. Halloran was on the porch in his nightshirt with the old scattergun he kept for snakes. The 3 bounty men, counting on sleeping people and finding a roused armed station instead, did the math bounty men always do. They were there for money, not glory, and money's no good to a dead man. But one of them already had Nolan. He'd come on the well house from the blind side and got an arm around her before the horses started, and he had her hauled half across his saddle with a forearm at her throat. And she wasn't fighting, because Tay had come out from behind the trough now, into the open, into the light, the one place he should never have been, and she would not move in any way that drew a hand toward her son. It's a strange thing to watch a person stop being able to breathe and choose it. Let her go, Eliza said. She'd come out in the brown dress with her hair down, and she had no weapon at all, and she walked straight toward the mounted man with the empty hands held open, the same as the first afternoon, and I understood with a cold drop that she was going to do it again, put herself in the space between, except this time there was no sick leg to tend. There was only a rope and a saddle and a long ride to a man who turned people into scrip. "Eliza," I said, "Eliza, don't." "You take her, you take me," Eliza said to the bounty man, not stopping. "There's no script for a white woman, mister. You haul me in with her, you've got kidnapping and a witness, and that lieutenant from Tuesday already wrote your friend Prute's name in a book. You let her down, you ride out, nobody chases you. That's the only sum here that ends with you free. Coins on a counter, daring him to call the count wrong. Even now, even there. And here is where the world did the thing it does, the thing no story warns you about because it doesn't flatter anyone. It didn't come down to courage. It came down to the rim. The 3 fires had not gone out in 3 nights. The band had kept their word the way Eliza kept hers, the way Nolan kept hers, the way the boy kept his with a thrown stone, and at the sound of the horses, at the first gray noise of it carrying up the still dawn air, they came down off that rim. Not many, not a war party. 8, maybe 10, the old man with the gray in his hair at the front of them, and they came down fast and silent, and they did not need to do anything at all but be there. A line of mounted Apache appearing out of the dawn light on the high ground, for the arithmetic to change all the way over. The bounty man let Nolan down. He let her down, and he and his 2 friends rode south so fast they left a hat. I never saw any of the 3 again. I heard one of them died of something unrelated and unimportant 2 years on, and I confess I did not grieve. It should have ended there, clean. The good delivered and the bad scattered, but I told you nothing ends that clean, and the country had one more piece to fit in, and it fitted in cold. Prute was on the ridge road. He'd come to watch his fire from a safe distance, the way I'd said he would, and now he saw it gone wrong, saw the Apache down off the rim, saw his bought men running, saw the whole shameful collapse of his second scheme. And he did the thing that men who can't bear shame do at the very end, which is reach for the loudest thing they have. He had a rifle. He was 300 yards off and a poor shot, and his hands were shaking with rage. And he fired into the yard once at no one and at everyone, at the whole picture of his own undoing. The old man from the rim took it. He'd put himself, without a word, between the ridge road and Nolan and the boy, between the gun and the reason they'd all turned the band around 3 nights before, and the wild shot found him because a wild shot has to find someone. That's the only law it knows. He came off his horse slow. They got to him fast, his people, and Eliza ran to him too with her clerk's useless clean hands, but it was through the chest, and there's nothing in any sick room on earth for that. And he knew it, and he wasn't afraid. I saw it in him the same as I'd seen the fear absent in Nolan the first afternoon. These were people who'd done their being afraid years ago, all at once, and had nothing left for it now but a terrible clear attention to what mattered. He said something to Nolan. He put his hand on the boy's head. And then, and I will never know why, I am not owed a reason and I'll not invent one, he turned his head and found me, the one white man kneeling there in the dust, and he said in his flat, careful mission English, the last words he spent, "You watched the wrong road." Not cruel, just true. The truest thing anyone ever said to me, and I have had it in the ledger of my chest every day since. You watched the wrong road. I'd been so busy watching for the danger I expected, in the direction I expected it, that I'd let the real one ride in quiet from the south behind a fixed wheel and a paid debt and a tipped hat. I had been, right to the end, a man who prepared for the trouble that flattered his foresight and missed the trouble that didn't. He died before the sun was full up. They buried him themselves up on the rim in their own way, and they would not let us help, and I did not blame them. We'd cost them enough. That's a thing the easy version leaves out, that even the good we did had a price, and they paid the heaviest part of it, the way the people with the least to spare always seem to. Nolan and the boy went with the band that evening. There was nothing else for it. The patrol would come again now, with a dead man and gunfire to report, and the only safety left for them was distance and dark. Nolan came to Eliza before they rode. She didn't have the English for whatever she wanted to say, or maybe English didn't have it either. Some things don't translate because they don't live in words in any language. She took both of Eliza's hands, the clerk's hands, that had cleaned a wound and held a line twice without a weapon, and she pressed something into them. The worn knife. The willow leaf blade, thin as a whisper, that she'd held flat against her thigh that first afternoon ready to spend her life with it. Then she got up on the horse with her son in front of her, and Tay turned around in the saddle and looked for me and lifted his hand, not waving, just lifting it, open palm out, the way I'd lifted mine on the rim, the way Eliza had put hers open on her knees. An empty hand. I see you. No harm. The boy had learned it from us and was giving it back, and I had to look at the horses for a minute. They rode north into the dark, and the three fires never came back to the rim, and the country closed over them the way it closes over everything, patient and wide and unbothered. Prout ran. Of course he ran. A man who fires into a yard and kills the wrong target by accident is still a man who killed someone, and the lieutenant's book had his name in it twice now. I heard he made it to Texas. I heard a great many things about Prout over the years and chose to believe the worst of them, which is a small sin, and I'll answer for it gladly. Eliza stayed. That's the part I still don't fully understand and have stopped trying to. She'd come for a small life and found the opposite, and a woman with sense might have got back on the next stage and tried being small somewhere quieter. She didn't. She took the $9 and her keep, and she ran Halloran's books and his correspondence, and the books were never so honest, and when the old man passed 2 years on he left her the store, which scandalized the county, and which she ran straight and fair until, well, that's further on than this story goes.